Good morning, small but mighty group of folks. We're excited to have you here for what I think is going to be a very interesting panel called The Social Good Network, How Rising Generations Elevate Dialogue and Democracy with Technology. My name is Kaya Henderson, and I lead the Center for Rising Generations at the Aspen Institute. This is a new center that we're standing up to ensure that leadership is a predictable part of growing up for young people 14 to 24. We believe that you don't have to wait until you're however old to be a leader, that young people are leading right now, and we want to make sure that they have the skills and the opportunities to solve problems for themselves, for their communities, and for the world. And I have two amazing young people who are doing just that. Faith Vieira is the Civic Engagement Manager at Youth Civic Hub, and Cheyenne Chowdhury is the founder of Reach for Help. He's an AI researcher and more, and you're gonna get to spend the morning hearing from them about how they come to this work and how they use technology to drive their work. So I'm gonna ask each of them to just share briefly, what is it that you do in your role at Youth Civic Hub and at Reach for Help?
Hi everybody, I'm Faith. I'm the Civic Engagement Manager at YVote and manage the Youth Civic Hub. And I started at YVote when I don't even know how old I was, but I was in high school and I started as a participant, and I went away to college and I came back as a facilitator. And then I just kind of worked up, and now I'm a full-time worker and I deal with partnerships, and I manage the Youth Civic Hub, which is a digital tool that was made by Youth for Youth to increase civic access to civic information at a more digestible capacity for youth. We have a team of about 9 to 12 young people working on our team. They create the content, they do the outreach, and they program the website. So yeah, it's a really nice place to work, I think.
Tell a little bit about what YVote does.
Yeah, so YVote is a civic education organization for young people, for high schoolers, and we have several programs that speak about democracy, current events, social media, and kind of giving you the tools to really navigate that. And then the Youth Civic Hub came from that, and the initiative is really a tool that we can use to bring in different communities and spread the mission and values that YVote shares. In communities that are marginalized, communities that don't have access to a lot of civic engagement or a low youth voter turnout.
Thank you. Cheyenne, tell us a little bit about Reach for Help.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. First of all, I just want to say thank you, Kaya, for inviting me here. I've been very fortunate to meet some of you guys. I'm relatively new to this space, so thank you for being patient with me. I'm Cheyenne. I run Reach for Help. I started it back during COVID. And essentially what we do is we're a data-driven disaster response nonprofit slash like tech nonprofit. So what do we do? What do those 4 words basically mean? To demonstrate, I'll give you a brief example of what we did during COVID and then like what we've been doing since then. So basically what we do is we map out where people need help, and then we map out who can help, and then sort of bridge those two things together. So in India during COVID, when the Delta wave peaked around like 2021, kind of a resurgence in COVID, there were a lot of people who required medical assistance and aid in remote, rural parts of the country in India. So there was one lovely lady who I got to know very closely. Her name was Monu. She's currently like 68 years old, and at the time, she actually needed oxygen cylinders after contracting COVID. And she was in this remote part of Jaipur and wasn't able to get one, so her nephew Rajiv called like a call center that was based in Mumbai asking for oxygen cylinders, and they didn't have any at the time in Mumbai, which was very far from Jaipur. So what we did is we connected Rajiv and Monu to a host of different organizations. One of them was like an organization that looks for like different resources. Another one, which is a student-run group that like had drivers so that they could deliver resources to Monu. And so what we do is we kind of like find these different points of who can help, and many times that requires multiple different organizations kind of put together to actually get critical resources to people in need. And then we've scaled that up to Bangladesh during the floods, working with governments, civil society agencies, the UN, et cetera. And yeah, kind of putting together, doing a lot of data-driven understanding of what is happening around the world and being able to map that out and push resources in the direction that they need to be, often in rural and underserved communities.
Thank you. So this is a technology conference. This is where EdTech comes to play. Talk a little bit about the role that technology plays in helping Reach for Help do its thing.
Yeah, of course. So my background is in computer science. I'm currently a college student at Columbia, and also I do on the side like AI research at Harvard Med, mostly in like medical AI. So my background's completely computational. So I come at the area of disaster response from a very like tech-centric side. So oftentimes Reach for Help, what we do is we look at data from remote sensing, so satellite information, to census data, to survey data from like local UN workers or NGOs who are working on the ground, and then kind of take all that and piece together where people need help. So for example, in Ukraine, we were working with a couple of different NGOs who were working on the ground as well as the Ukrainian government. And another company, so we use satellite information from NASA, but there was another company called Maxar that has very high resolution images that were able to help us find what's called unexploded ordinances in Ukraine. So that's basically a type of shelling. So when the invasion was happening, oftentimes when bombings happen, there's shellings that don't explode immediately on impact, but they're essentially like a landmine. So what we were able to do was we were able to use these satellite images to find these areas that haven't exploded yet, but there are still people living in those areas. So we need to inform the government and different agencies that are working to evacuate them. And so that requires a lot of analytical capability, image processing, and then of course the outreach to actually work with the people on the ground.
Faith, talk a little bit about how technology powers the work that you do.
Yeah, so unlike Cheyenne, I am not a techie. I have really bad tech skills, but I think that's what makes the Youth Civic Hub so unique, because it is a technology tool, a digital tool, but you don't need to know anything about tech to be able to use it. And so a common question that we're asking is, how can we make this more accessible to people that don't really know anything about tech? And so I have that lens, and I can offer that perspective to people, but what I like about it is that we can take this anywhere. And so we're located in New York right now, and we have the hub in New York, but we can take this to different communities. We can have the smart board or the screen and show this and kind of show kids how to use it on their computer and go to college and access it that way. So I really appreciate the fact that this is such a transferable tool, and we're accessing a lot of different neighborhoods and communities in that way because of it.
So we hear about your generation characterized as the anxious generation. If you go down to the bookstore, there's the anxious generation, there's the disengaged teen book. There are all of these books and assumptions about young people. And I'm honored that I get to work at the Center for Rising Generations, because my job is to interact with young people like you. I find that this generation is actually quite engaged, is empowered to solve problems, is interested, is strategic. Talk to me a little bit about your peers and what you are seeing out there from young people.
Yeah, well, I'll set the record, and I will say that I am anxious, but that's okay, and it's okay to lean into what somebody is calling you. It's fine, you know, we don't have to spend our entire time trying to prove that we're not something. It's okay to be anxious, you know. I spoke to my dad this morning, and he was like, once you start talking, you'll really get into your groove, and I find that to be very true with my peers as well. You can be anxious, but once you have actionable steps to conquer something that you're anxious about, the anxiety melts away and you really create some ownership. So that's what we're seeing, that's what we're trying to push, is how do we create ownership so that when you're anxious about something, you can create the actionable steps, you can start to conquer your fears. And I will say that my generation happens to be probably one of the most creative groups of people that I've ever met, you know. Like the things that we do with technology, and we just continue to build and push the limits even higher. It's a wonderful thing to work with. It's a wonderful thing to hear and to listen to all of these things. And I will say that I've walked into rooms where people see that I'm the youngest person and I'm bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. Like, people have told me that so many times, and that's also okay, and that's not something that you want to diminish and push down. You want to encourage that creativity. You want to encourage the technology side to it, you know. We are being raised by adults that didn't have this type of technology, so when we're using AI to answer emails, they're like, oh, you're so lazy, but we're not. We're creative, and we're trying to find different ways to be efficient, and I'm glad that I can be on that little crevice of young adult youth where I can really help to guide the people that are under me. And it's something that I love to do, so I'm very appreciative of my generation.
That's wonderful. I'm a college student, so I'm currently at Columbia, and if anyone's been reading the news, there's been a lot of stuff going on my campus. I actually had a conversation with my mom before I came here, and she told me, so Cheyenne, you're, but by the way, hi, I'm Mu. I'm the one who bhalobashi. I love you in Bangla. So if she is watching this, hi. But she told me before I came here, she was like, okay, Cheyenne, you are brown. Your last name is a very Muslim name, Chaudhary. You have a beard, and you're a Columbia student. So picture this. You arrive at the airport, they're gonna profile you. They're gonna say, oh, you tick every single box to make you a suspect, so that we should probably ask you questions. I mean, there's been students who have been detained on my campus, who have been detained at Tufts, who have been detained all across the country right now, especially international students, I think we are all feeling a lot of anxiety regarding what we are allowed to say, what we're allowed to express in our kind of day-to-day. And yeah, that's something that resonates very deeply with me, especially having seen it in front of my eyes, firsthand. So there's certainly anxieties regarding that, but also, as Faith mentioned, we're anxious about many of the different problems that are facing us in the coming years. I mean, anything from unemployment to a lot of my friends who have been applying for jobs. I'm a junior, so that's a problem for future me. But it's certainly something that is always in the back of your head. Climate change is obviously there's a lot of studies have shown 75% of young Gen Z folk have some form of climate anxiety or some doomism. So obviously it's taking a toll on us. But at the same time, I think I've been fortunate to be in a lot of different spaces where I've met a lot of really incredible young people doing just phenomenal things. And I think this is a space where I genuinely do think a lot of young people would benefit from being, and also the space would benefit from having young people. We've seen a lot of really incredible products on education, different ed tech tools and platforms, but a lot of them are aimed mainly at young people as kind of the customers, kind of the users of it. I think a lot of times it may be also beneficial to see them as co-creators, because myself being a young person, there's also people younger than me. I actually met a couple of high school students here, one of them was in the audience, so that's really, really wonderful to see, the fact that there are a lot of young people here. But as Faith mentioned, just echoing that, young people are very creative. People have been using ChatGPT from everything from using homework, doing their homework, to texting your girl, which I may or may not have done, but to generating Ghibli images, which was the rave on Twitter a couple of weeks ago or 2 weeks ago. So I think there's an incredible amount of creativity in how young people can use and harness the tools that we essentially grow up with and we use in every single aspect of our life, and how we can kind of apply that. And Reach for Help, we've done that. We are probably one of the younger folks in the disaster response space, so we have kind of been able to use some of the skills in AI and just to be able to use analytical capacities that are often taken for granted in our generation, in a very novel space for many folk in my generation and many folk who are already in that space who may not have really considered. So I think there's a really important factor of having young people who understand the technology very well at the table, at spaces where oftentimes young people don't really engage much and are not really given a space to engage much.
Mm-hmm. We have, at the Center for Rising Generations, we have a team of 9 people, 6 of whom are what we're calling early career professionals, so that I don't go to HR jail, but they're young people. They are young people who we've hired to co-create this work with, and they tell me all the time that the place that we want to operate is at the intersection of wisdom and imagination. And I was like, am I wisdom and your imagination? They're like, yes. So that's okay. I think a lot about how we work together in co-creation. And as a young leader, Cheyenne, you're operating across different cultures, different contexts. You said you all are one of the younger set of people in the humanitarian aid space. How do you build trust with the communities that you're serving and with the other organizations that you work with?
Yeah, so I think we've had the fortune of working with a lot of different organizations, big and small. I used to work with the UN under UNHCR. I was actually, right after high school, I was stationed in a refugee camp under the UNHCR for the Rohingya refugees, if anyone's familiar with them. So I was living in the camps for a couple of months and was able to, it was like a very fulfilling experience. It's still very close to my heart. And it kind of opened my eyes to what can be done using technology. I'd been interested in technology my whole life, but I'd only kind of seen it from like a kind of a CS bro mentality. But in being in the camps, you got to really see how technology was used to uplift a lot of people who have been marginalized since the 80s for many, many years, and they've been essentially displaced and genocided out of Myanmar into Bangladesh. And I think that context certainly like opens your eyes to, wow, like this is a problem that is happening. You can read about it in the news, but obviously seeing it in person is very, very impactful. And also having worked across different sectors from Bangladesh, again, in the floods, to Ukraine, to LA when there's wildfires, to earthquakes in Mexico and Oaxaca. So my team and I, we get to work a lot with these groups. In many cases, they come from very different backgrounds. Some of them are super technical. Some of them are people who have barely ever used a cell phone or use internet. So in many cases, like the way to build trust, oftentimes there's two main points. One of them is reducing the amount of friction. So many cases, myself being a kind of a tech person, oftentimes we like to over-engineer solutions. We like to build like a fancy tech platform with like a really fancy UI and cool AI stuff and just pop it in a package and then send it to people. And they're like, yo, I don't have internet. Like, yo, I don't have a laptop. This is actually like studies, Pew Research actually found that roughly, I have some stats, maybe I'll pull it up, being the nerd that I am. But there's, in parts of like the rural South here, approximately 38% of black residents in the rural South don't have broadband access. And in parts like Mississippi, 43% of residents don't have broadband access and don't have a laptop. So imagine like building an ed tech platform and then having all these bells and whistles and then giving it to people who have no access to education or very reduced access to education, a platform that requires them to have technology and access to resources that they don't have. And I think that's really important, like having a way to create a system that's frictionless, that allows them to use the tools that they use. So sometimes it could be like pen and paper. Oftentimes that's what we do. Like we have the way we collect some information about where people need help. It could just literally be people write down a bunch of unstructured notes. And now with language models, it's been really easy to take all that information, kind of standardize it in our own pipeline, but still allow these organizations to do the same kind of operations that they've been doing without us butting in and say like, hey, you have to use our Google form or our spreadsheet or our form or our application. So I think that's really important, like the lack of friction. And the other thing is building sort of equity across the larger organizations and the smaller ones. So many cases, larger organizations or governments, they have a lot of resources, but they don't really understand the local context that many of these organizations do. So these organizations could be anything from like churches, synagogues, mosques, or like student-run groups that are organized entirely on WhatsApp. And they have grown up there their entire lives. They understand, they know their leaders, they know they are their leaders, and in many cases, they know everybody in their entire town. So I think also trusting them to know what's best for themselves is a really important way to build trust. To kind of build these bridges between like government officials to say like, hey, we know that you know what your people need, so we'll give you all the resources you need, just let us know what you need and let us know what you're doing with that in whatever fashion you want to, and we will just get it to you. So I think that's like an important way to reduce any kind of friction and also give them the agency that they need to affect their own communities.
Thank you. Faith, we are having lots of conversations right now, I wonder why, about civic education. Usually when you think about civics, you think about a government class in high school that bored you to death with the 3 branches of government and yada, yada, yada. Tell me a little bit about how the Youth Civic Hub differs from traditional civic education approaches.
Yeah, well, for starters, we're youth-led, so there's 2 kind of compartments for the Youth Civic Hub. On the workforce development side, we have the youth that are creating the content, doing the outreach, programming the website. And I think that really adds some credibility and trust, as Cheyenne was saying, to the work that we're pushing out, because it's coming from someone that looks like the consumer. And then on the other side, we're reaching out to youth that are looking for a little bit more clarity on what civics could look like. I had a conversation with the Office of the Community Liaison in New York, and he is a community organizer in the Bronx, and I'm talking about civics, and I'm like, we do democracy projects, and we're talking about voter registration, and he was like, well, my population really cares about public safety, and that's what civics looks like for them. And that really opened up my mind to what civics really could be. I mean, I knew that it could be issue-based, but I didn't realize that the population that we're talking to really matters so much in the communities, because civics could look like many, many things in different communities. And so what we're seeing with the push with the Youth Civic Hub is that it can be issue-based, and we actually just relaunched our issue-based guide, shout out to my content team, yesterday, and it's for the mayoral election. So we focus on 5 key topics: reproductive rights, climate justice, education, economy, and gun control. And the mayoral candidates that are going to be competing against each other, we have their stances on all of those 5 topics. So anybody can go on our website, we could look up the issue-based guides and see where all of those people stand. And what we're seeing right now within civics is a really robust amount of information that's coming out. We're seeing an information overhaul, and not just for youth, but for adults as well. If I hear terrorist one more time, I don't know what I'm going to do. But the anxiety comes from the information overhaul and no action. We're seeing all this stuff in the news, but we don't know what we can do with it. The Youth Civic Hub is different because we provide information and actionable things. Going back to the mayoral election that's coming up, we have the issue-based guides, we have that information, but then also on our opportunity board, we have mayoral forums that are coming up. So you could attend this mayoral forum and use our issue-based guides to look at the information and start to create informed questions and talk to the mayoral candidates through the mayoral forum that's on our opportunity board. So we're trying to combine those two and package it in a way to lessen the anxiety that our generation is experiencing. And so that's how we really differ from the traditional model. So we can be in classrooms and have that information. And once that class is done, you think everything is over. And then at 4 p.m. on Thursday, you get a newsletter and you have the opportunities in your inbox. And so that's how we're following up to not only provide information, but create actionable steps that lessens anxiety and encourages people to create community projects and really just never stop thinking about civics, I don't think. But it's a way of life. It's constantly ingrained, and it's not something that we could ignore anymore. But if we have a system that's digestible and it's friendly and it's open and it's fun and it's warm and it's community oriented, I think we'll start to see more people not only interested but also active and engaged in civics.
Can you give us an example of a community project that really made you proud that came out of the Youth Civic Hub?
Oh boy, there's so many that I can talk about. Actually, happening tomorrow, I'm not going to be there, unfortunately, but we have a partnership with the Brooklyn Public Library, and that's a really proud partnership that we just formed, and a couple of people, our facilitators, are going to do a voter registration drive there, pre-registration, voter registration. And even though that's a typical lens of civics, then we do a follow-up. So Why Vote's slogan, or logo, says at and beyond the ballot box. So we can start with the ballot box with the voter registration because that's what people typically know civics to be, and it's circling around the news. But then we go beyond the ballot box, and the next step that we could talk about is, what are you interested in? What do you want to talk about? And we can start to build the steps to create that. So our youth are going to be at Brooklyn Public Library tomorrow doing a voter registration workshop, and we're going to start to create those conversations and those partnerships and those relationships, and then people are going to start to feel comfortable and say, hey, you know what, I really want to get involved in my community and build a garden or something and provide resources to my neighbors in a way. And we'll say, okay, well, look at our power map and you can see what local official has the same interest as you, and then it takes off from there.
Cheyenne, tell us about a project that you are most proud of that you were able to accomplish through Reach for Help.
I mentioned a couple of stuff like the project we did in Ukraine and also in India that I'm particularly proud of. But as a Bangladeshi myself, I grew up there for half my life before I moved to New York. I was like very fortunate to be able to work with a lot of folks there, especially from my days at the UN working there. Recently, if any of you have heard of news coming out of Bangladesh over last summer, it's been a tumultuous political period. We had a revolution that then overthrew the previous government, and now there's a new government, and there's been a lot of political turmoil going on in the country, unfortunately. But regardless of that, climate change isn't really stopping. So there's still disasters happening. There's still a large amount of people who are being displaced, who are being affected by these disasters. And that's something that, given the turmoil in the government, it made it much more difficult to actually get aid to people out in those areas. So last year, around June and then August, there was another big flood. A lot of my extended family members, they live in Sylhet, they live in parts of the country that are generally really affected by floods. And so oftentimes, like that, last year was particularly challenging because you don't really have any kind of infrastructure after the government was essentially torn down. A lot of public infrastructure was kind of being rebuilt from the ground up. And what we had to do is we kind of had to rebuild our own network of different organizations. So there's still like some NGOs that work there, such as BRAC and Jago Foundation, and smaller NGOs that are like my friends, basically, who I grew up with. And we were able to kind of band together. It was obviously much more challenging, and we were able to kind of band together a group of different people who are very passionate about wanting to help in different households, and we were able to acquire, like during the floods, obviously you have to map out where people need help, but also make sure you're able to get things. And so there were a couple of organizations, Jago, BRAC helped us with like fundraising, and we also like started a GoFundMe and whatnot. So you have to first of all bring in funds. Next, you have to figure out how to get the resources that you buy with the funds. So anything from dry food, clean water, menstrual products for women in those areas, to actually get it to them. And then Jago and a couple of other groups, we basically found like lifeboats, and then we're able to distribute them to like different shelters that were all across the parts of like outside of Sylhet. And I think it was like a big testament to show that even in an extreme amount of turmoil and instability, which is happening quite in a lot of places around the world right now, we're seeing kind of a pattern of democratic backsliding, of a lot of protests and revolts happening around the world. Despite that, there's still a glue that kind of gels people together during times of crisis that allow us to be resilient even in the face of like larger and larger, more and more severe crises, from climate change to unemployment to et cetera. So I think it's something I'm quite proud of, especially because it's in my own home and it's people I grew up with, and it's people I really deeply admire.
So this is an education-focused conference. How do you think some of the approaches that you've used at Reach for Help could address educational inequities, especially in vulnerable places?
Yeah, so while we use a lot of like remote sensing data, it's not very feasible to use like satellite imagery to figure out where people don't have educational access, but there are a couple of different metrics. Like generally speaking, when you do disaster response, a large metric that we use is socioeconomic data, and oftentimes like the people who are affected by climate disasters are people who are generally in lower socioeconomic brackets. And so you see, especially in like rural and agrarian areas, people depend on livestock, people depend on like agriculture for their entire livelihoods, and also like play a pretty big role in the economy. So oftentimes climate disasters destroy their entire livelihood. And so not only are they like losing their homes, not only are they displaced for a little bit, but when they come back after the floods are all gone, after the droughts are done, now they're basically back in poverty. And I think that's a really important thing to recognize, that in the US as well, like with Hurricane Helene and Milton, where we worked with a couple of different agencies here and organizations, the people who are affected, predominantly Black and Latino communities, when they come back, that's when like their lives are essentially turned upside down. And so now they have to rebuild, they're sent back in poverty. If you think about like the hierarchy of needs, now education is not really like of utmost concern. Now it's like actually putting food on the table, getting a job, making sure your kids are able to like have a meal for the next day. So I think like it's really important to understand that often these systematic issues are exacerbated with climate change, and education is like a really important thing. And sort of mapping out where access to education. I mentioned that there's certainly statistics on specific demographics like Blacks and Latinos in the rural South that don't have access to education. I think it's really important that using the data-driven approach that we at Reach for Help sort of pride ourselves on, we use that data and be able to make targeted sort of interventions in those areas. So like I mentioned, the frictionless approach, in many cases where people don't have computers or access to internet, how can we utilize something like a telephony-based system where in Bangladesh there's actually a way for people to like access commodities or access education just by like using a phone. If you have a cell tower, which is quite common in the US, if you utilize AI, yesterday, Andrew Ng talked a lot about like voice-based applications, and I think that that's actually a very fundamental approach. Like everybody can talk to some degree. Not everyone might have the ability to access the internet, but if you can get education through your phone, or if you can get access to education through your phone and automate many of those approaches, that can provide a lot of equity to people who might not have the technology to use some of these platforms.
Mm-hmm. Faith, when you think about shifting the landscape of education from a civics perspective, how could or should education treat civics differently?
I think it needs to be ingrained in the curriculum a lot more. I mean, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We know that there are government teachers and social studies teachers that already have their really creative curriculums that they're designing. And so the real question that we're trying to ask, and I ask in every partnership meeting, is what's the gap? Where can we fit in? And if we're asking more teachers that question, like where can this curriculum fit in? The wonderful thing is that we have a teachers hub. And so like I said, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel and take over from teachers, but we have curriculum there that teachers can download and directly plug in. And so being creative, the creative generation, I'm like, well, how can English teachers use this tool? Do they know students that are interested in civics or interested in a specific issue and don't really know how to guide them? And that's what the Youth Civic Hub is for, being able to reach more audiences, being accessible. And I just want to say very quickly, when I was in college, I had no friends. And don't feel bad for me. I think I'm doing fine now. Don't feel bad. But because I didn't have any friends and I just had a good grade point average, I wasn't aware of what was going on in my community through a peer-to-peer arrangement. And so I didn't have my first internship until I went to graduate school that I had to pay for. I had to pay for that internship just to get class credit. Crazy, I know. But through that internship, I got my first full-time job. And so thinking back now to how we can help youth and really change education through that lens, I'm like, what if other people were talking about opportunities? And what if that was a tool that we can use? So when you see a student that doesn't have a friend and is sitting by themselves, they have this technology, this digital tool that they don't have to really interact with people that much. You don't have to worry about that. But opportunities are coming to your inbox. So this is not just a tool that government teachers, social studies teachers can use. We can really go through the principles and through a top-down mentality to really spread this throughout education and make it something that we're looking at every day.
If you had the resources to grow the Youth Civic Hub nationally, because right now you're just operating in New York, what would that expansion look like?
Well, in an ideal world, we would have a hub in every state, in every city, but realistically, expansion looks like more partnerships, more relationships, more community. And a call to action would be to find some community in civics. And if you don't know where to start, I'm on LinkedIn, you can follow me, and we can have a chat like that. And really expansion is figuring out where the gap is and adding something to fill in that gap. As I was saying before, information plus action equals less anxiety and more of a structured approach to solving some of the things that we're anxious about. So that's what expansion would look like, having those real life conversations that doesn't feel too overwhelming. And then adding this quickly, I hope, and implementing it into different states and cities so that accessibility is around for everybody, and we're not so overwhelmed with all the information that's coming at us at one time.
Audience, I'm coming to you for questions in 1 minute. Cheyenne, tell me, what is the future of Reach for Help? What is it going to look like moving forward?
Yeah, of course. So I'll be quick because we don't have a ton of time, but essentially, I think similar, echoing what Faith just mentioned, partnerships, sort of growing out what we currently have. Like I oftentimes, like whenever there's a crisis, it's usually me or like a member of my small team where we just like reach out to people in that area and say like, what do y'all need? And oftentimes like that can get quite draining, especially because like some of our members, like we have a stipend, and some running a nonprofit is often quite stressful, as Kaya can certainly, and both of these people can certainly admit to it. And sometimes like funding can certainly help not exacerbate, ameliorate some of those issues, but in many cases, like also having more of a larger network to understand, like, okay, if there's a crisis here, how do we actually tap into the network there easier? That's I think a really big challenge that we want to overcome. Another thing is technology. I think right now, there's a lot of really good stuff in the works in the language model space, and I think we saw it here. But going back to the friction idea, it's not always super great. So like oftentimes you have to like really prompt engineer, and you have to like kind of get it to do exactly what you want to do. So there's been a lot of very interesting stuff I've been just reading in my own research, but also here looking at what Google's been working on, what AWS, what a lot of like these tech companies are working on, especially around like agents, is I think super interesting in a way that allows these models to kind of self-correct themselves and kind of meet the guidelines or rigor that we want in like actual usability and actual high stakes scenarios. So I think improving our partnerships, improving our access to funding and networks, and improving like the access to technology and actual technology that's useful in these kind of scenarios is really important.
Thank you. Audience, questions?
Do I need a microphone?
I think you can just...
Okay, I wish I had an opera voice. So thank you so much. I am in the right session, and I wish that every person in this conference heard what you just said. I learned a lot. And I am very curious from your experience, and struck by something particular you said, Faith, where you say we were raised by, and we are being raised by adults who didn't grow up in this world like it is what we have now. So I am very curious on your take as to how can you help these adults be better equipped to raise the children that we are raising right now. Like, what's your connection with children, and what's your connection to these adults that are working with children all day, every day?
Yeah, well, first, the work that we're doing is intergenerational. And so I always say youth-led because the youth are there and they're doing the work, but the adults have to be there to guide and kind of, I hate to say it, like add credibility. Sometimes people don't take youth and young people seriously, but when they see an adult standing there, like, okay, maybe you have something of value. But it's intergenerational work, and to your point, adults need to be trained the same way that youth need to be trained on how to use these new technologies and tools. Like, I was there when ChatGPT launched. So the assumption kind of is like, oh, you're growing up with it, you don't really need to be trained on this because you're growing as this is also developing, but that's not true. There's always room for improvement, always room to learn, and so this is intergenerational work. We need as much buy-in from the adults and the parents as we do with the young people, and it's something fun to do. I mean, I love my parents, my mom, my dad. They know I'm not ashamed to like interact with them and bring them on and help them and for them to help me. And so going back to what you said about the wisdom and innovation or imagination, yes, exactly. That's a really useful tool, and if everybody can be open-minded to understand that I can learn something from you and you can learn something from me, then I think that we would be in a good place, I think.
You want to weigh in?
Yeah, I totally echoing that. I think the word that comes to mind a lot is humility. I think on both sides, both on the adult side as well as the young people side, because oftentimes we can get in our own head and we're like, damn, we know how all this stuff works. We don't. And also same for adults. Like they say like, oh, you guys are just young folk, you're naive, you don't really know how the world works. Maybe, but you also don't. So I think like that sort of humility is very important on both sides. And as I mentioned, like I think having youth as co-creators, the emphasis on the co part is quite important, because oftentimes you can have young people on a stage, but it doesn't really, like, sometimes they're just tokenized. I mean, I've been at the UN, and no shame at all. But sometimes it does feel like organizations do have youth people on like a panel, like youth advisory committee, but we don't really do a whole lot. So I think it's important to like have people as creators and co-creators in that space instead of just talking and yapping. Another thing that I want to say is, obviously, I'm very thankful for Kaya for inviting me here, but also, like, I've been fortunate to be able to cultivate a network of people, and among youth, it's really important for us to, and kind of overcoming some anxiety as well, is like having a group of people as a support system, and I'm very thankful that Kaya is here, and I just want to shout out Amy Glassman, another wonderful member of Aspen, who introduced me to Kaya, and who has been supporting me since a couple of years back in the Aspen Institute's Future Leaders Climate Summit. And I want to extend that to also like other young people. So seeing a high school student here is really inspirational to me. And I hope to see more younger folks, such as myself, such as other people, at these spaces and given the agency to co-create.
Y'all, people ask me all the time, like, how are you managing in this crazy world? And this is how I'm managing. I get to hang out with amazing young people. So join me in thanking my panelists. And these are the ones who are going to save us all. Thank you.